Hey, how's it going everyone? MythicSeal here, and today we're going to be looking at 10 OP builds in Baldur's Gate 3. With patch 8 just around the corner dropping this very Tuesday, I figured I'd jump in and show you guys some builds that would be really beneficial for anyone trying to tackle an honor mode run or are just looking to make some pretty high damage dealing builds. So jumping straight into our first build, the first build we're going to take a look at is the one punch build. And the idea behind this build is that essentially you can almost kill any enemy by just landing one punch. So first thing you're going to want to do is have your stats look like this. Next thing you're going to want to do is sink 6 levels into Way of the Four Elements Monk subclass. First feat you're going to want to have is Tavern Brawler, which actually adds your strength modifier to your damage and attack rolls twice. And you're going to want to sink that ability point into strength to make it a total of 18. Next thing you're going to want to do is sink 4 levels into Rogue, with Thief being your subclass for that fast hands passive, which allows us to have an additional bonus action per turn. And lastly, you're going to want to sink 2 levels into Fighter for that bonus action. And for your final feat, you're going to want to pick Ability Improvement and sink those 2 ability points into Strength to bring it to a total maximum of 20. In terms of the gear you're going to want to have for this build, the first piece of gear you're going to want is the Scabby Pugilist Circlet, which actually adds 2 additional damage to your weapon and unarmed attacks when you're surrounded by 2 or more enemies. Next piece of gear is the Garb of the Land and Sky, which the important passive of this one is that while you're using Step of the Wind, your next attack roll has an advantage and deals an additional 1d8 force damage. Next, you're going to want the Boots of Uninhibited Kushigo, which allows the wearer to deal additional damage equal to their Wisdom modifier with unarmed strikes. Next, you're going to want Gloves of Soul Catching, which adds another 1 to 10 force damage to your unarmed attacks. And once per turn as well, with an unarmed hit, you regain 10 health points. For the rings, you're going to want the Callous Glow Ring and Killer Sweetheart. And you're going to want the Sentient Amulet for its key restoration. Now while in combat, the best way to maximize damage output for this build is first you're going to want to activate the Step of the Wind dash. And then you're going to want to land as many unarmed strikes as you can and finish it up with a flurry of blows. You're also going to want to make use of the Action Surge as well to land additional unarmed strikes. In total, each turn you take, you're looking to deal approximately around 78 to 148 damage per turn. It's a very heavy hitting build. Now the next build we're going to be taking a look at is the Eldritch Build. And the whole idea behind this build is to maximize the Warlock's Eldritch Blast cantrip, which is a really powerful cantrip to use in combat. Now the first thing you're going to want to do is sink 8 levels into the Warlock class, specifically the Great Old One subclass, and make sure that you have Eldritch Blast as one of your cantrips. You're going to want to have your stats look like this. For your first 2 Eldritch invocations, you're going to make sure you pick Agonizing Blast and Repelling Blast, which both directly affect the Eldritch Blast cantrip. For your first feat, you're going to want to pick Spell Sniper, which allows all your cantrips to land crits easier. For your next feat, you're going to want to pick Ability Improvement and slot those 2 ability points in Constitution and Charisma, bringing the totals to 17 and 18. Next thing you're going to want to do is put 4 levels into Champion Fighter. Now Champion Fighter gives you this passive where it's easier to land crits, and I'm not sure if that directly affects spells, but it's worth having in since the future levels of Warlock and any other class don't exactly make this build any much better. And for your final feat, once again, you're going to want to pick Ability Improvement and put the 2 into Charisma to bring it to a total of 20. In terms of gear for this class, the first piece of gear you're going to want is Hood of the Weave, which gives you a 2+ bonus to spell attack rolls. The next piece of gear you're going to want is Cloak of the Weave, which also gives you a 1+ bonus to attack spell rolls. Next piece of gear is the Potent Robe, which means our cantrips actually deal additional damage equal to our Charisma modifier, which in this case would be +5. For the gloves, you're going to want the Gemini gloves, which gives you this little toggle which allows you to actually target an additional person when using a cantrip. For the rings, you're going to want the Ring of Mental Inhibition and the Risky Ring. And for the amulet, you're going to want the Spine Shooter Amulet, which means when the wearer deals damage with a ranged spell attack, it inflicts 2 reverberations upon the target, which once an entity has 5 or more turns of reverberation, it takes 1 to 4 thunder damage. Now ideally in combat, you're going to be relying very heavily on your Eldritch Blasts. And the best way to maximize the damage for them when in combat is first you're going to want to activate Action Surge. And you're going to have this little toggle called Adroit Caster, which actually allows your cantrips to target an additional person. When you toggle your Adroit Caster and have Action Surge activated, it actually means you can shoot your Eldritch Blast 8 times, which means that every turn you're going to be dealing anywhere from 20 to 83 damage, which is some pretty solid damage for a spell that is only just a cantrip. The next build we're going to take a look at is what I call the solo build. Now the whole idea behind this build is for players who want to run a campaign solo, meaning having no companions in the party. First thing you're going to want to do is put all your levels into fighter champion and have your fighting style be great weapon fighting. You're going to want to make your stats look like this. Now in terms of the gear you're going to want for this build, the first piece of gear is going to be the Grimskull Helm, which grants you resistance to fire damage, and it also means attackers can't land critical hits on you. Next piece of gear you're going to want is the Cloak of Elemental Absorption, which means that once per short rest, whenever you get damaged with elemental type damage, it actually infuses to your weapon for the next attack you make. In terms of the armor, you're going to want to have the Helldusk Armor, which has a 21 armor class. For boots, you're going to want this Boots of Speed, so you can have that Click Heal ability, which means that for a bonus action, you actually can double your movement speed. And for gauntlets, you're going to want the Gauntlets of Frost Giant Strength, that actually increases your strength up to 23. For rings, you're going to want the After Death Do Us Part and Killer Sweetheart rings. For amulet, you're going to want the Amulet of Greater Health, which sets your Constitution score up to 23. For weapons, you're going to want Baldur'S, Giant Slayer, and Vicious Shortbow. Thanks to the fighter's action surge and all the bonus attacks you get from being level 12, it means your damage output per turn is anywhere from 68 to 108. Which is pretty beefy. And thanks to the After Death Do Us Part ring, whenever you get down, you actually get back up automatically with half your health. And since you're going to be gripped by Shadow Possession, it's actually going to boost your damage output. Now, since you're going to be a level 12 fighter champion, you actually get to have 2 fighting styles. And for your second fighting style, you're going to want to have defense to boost your armor class, so it's harder for enemies to land attacks on you. As for your feats, you're going to want to have Savage Attacker, Tough, and Alert, which makes your character start turns faster, increases your maximum health by a shit ton, and it also means you deal more damage when you attack because you get to roll twice for your damage rolls. Now this next build is a pretty fun one in my opinion, and I call it the Earth Myrmidon build, which you can assume what the main focal point of this build is going to be. The first thing you're going to do is sink 12 levels into the Circle of the Moon Druid. For your feats, you're going to want to have Mobile, which increases your movement speed, Tavern Brawler, and Elemental Adept Thunder. Now the gear items for this build are pretty simplistic. The only gear items you're going to want to have are the Shapeshifter's Hat, which is going to increase your Wild Shape charge by 1, Armor of Moon Basking, which grants you 22 additional temporary health points while you're wild shaped. And on top of that, you also gain a bonus to armor class. Shapeshifter's Boomerang, which means while you're shapeshifted, you gain a bonus to all checks. And the Corvid Token, which means you gain a jump and flying speed increase by 5 feet. And you also gain Feather Fall both in and out of your wild shape. Now the idea behind this build is that whenever you're in combat, you're always going to want to be in your Earth Myrmidon wild shape form. Being in this form means you have a huge health pool of 124 plus 22 thanks to our armor. Which a funny little thing about this build is actually if you look at the Thunder Strike, you'll see down in the toolkit that it says the damage output is 6 to 24. As it turns out actually, the damage input is much greater than this. Apparently it's a bug in the toolkit for it to list it as this, but each turn you're going to be looking to deal anywhere from 48 to 129 damage just using your Thunder Strike, which is a lot of damage to be dealing in a wild shape form. The only downfall of this build is that if you're ever encountering an enemy that has Thunder immunity, then your Thunder Strike is going to deal no damage at all. In terms of the stats, weapons, or other gear items you want to have on this build, you can have them be whatever you want. So whenever you do encounter an enemy who is immune to thunder damage, you can rely on other weapons, gear items, abilities. Now the next build we're going to take a look at is what I call the Gith Build. And this build is meant for anyone who loves maining Giths or is looking for a great way to optimize Lae'zel in the party. For this build, you're going to want to sink 11 levels into Transmutation Wizard and 1 level into Fighter. And you want to have your stats look like this. Now the gear for this build all hinges on the wearer being a Githyanki. First gear item you're going to want is the Circlet of Psionic Revenge, which means you're going to deal 1 to 4 psychic damage whenever you succeed a saving throw. And since you're Githyanki, it also means you gain a +1 bonus to Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma saving throws. Next gear item you're going to want is the Vivacious Cloak, which means you gain 8 temporary health points after casting a spell while in melee. Next, you're going to want the Boots of Psionic Movement, which means when a Githyanki casts Fly, their next weapon attack deals 1 to 4 psychic damage. They also gain the flying spell as well. For armor, you're going to want the Psionic Ward Armor, which if the wearer is Gith, it means that they have a resistance to psychic damage. You also gain 1 to 4 health points whenever you succeed a saving throw against a spell. For gloves, you're going to want the Brain Drain Gloves, which means whenever you deal psychic damage, you also inflict mental fatigue for 2 turns, which means enemies take 1 to 4 psychic damage. For rings, you're going to want the Ring of Mind Shielding and Strange Conduit Ring. And for amulet, you're going to want the Aberration Hunter's Amulet. For weapons, you're going to want Voss's Silver Sword and the Gith Yankee Longsword. And you're going to want to make sure that you have Voss's Silver Sword as an offhand weapon. And for your range, you're going to want the Gith Yankee Crossbow. For your fighting style, with being a fighter, you're going to want to have 2-weapon fighting. And for your feats, you're going to want to have Dual Wielder and also Savage Attacker. Now in terms of damage, this build really maximizes psychic damage output. Now while in combat, you're always going to make sure you cast Phantasmal Killer on whichever enemy you're targeting with said character, because it's essentially going to act as a hunter's mark for you. In total, you're looking to make anywhere from 21 to 112 damage per turn. The only downfall is that a big chunk of that damage is going to be psychic damage, so if you encounter an enemy that's immune to psychic damage, you're not going to be dealing as much. So the next build we're going to be looking at is what I call the Rage Build, and as the name says, this build's all about maximizing the Barbarian's Rage ability. Now the first thing you're going to do is sink 10 levels into the Barbarian Wild Heart subclass. You're going to want your stats to look like this. Now for your Bestial Heart, you're going to want to make sure you have Bear Heart selected, which means that whenever you rage, you gain a resistance to all damage types except Psychic. For your feats, you're going to want to pick Great Weapon Master and Savage Attacker. Now for your animal aspects, you're going to get 2. So the first one you're going to want to pick is Honey Badger, which means if you're poisoned, frightened, or charmed at the start of your turn, you have a 50% chance to begin rage without expending a rage charge. For your second animal aspect, you're going to want Aspect of the Elk, which increases your movement speed. And lastly, you're going to want to sink 2 levels into Fighter, with Great Weapon Fighting being your fighting style. Now in terms of gear, the first piece of gear you're going to want is the Horns of the Berserker. The Horns of the Berserker gives you a 2+ bonus to attack rolls when attacking creatures that have already taken damage, and it also means that your melee attacks also deal an extra 2 necrotic damage. You're going to want the Cloak of Protection as well to increase your armor class. The armor you're going to want to have is the Bone Spike Garb, which means you gain 15 temporary health points whenever you rage. It also means you reduce all incoming damage by 2. It also means as well that when you get attacked, you also deal back 3 piercing damage as retaliation. For boots, you're going to want the Bone Spike Boots, which means you get a 1+ bonus to armor class and saving throws as long as you're not wearing armor or holding a shield. It also increases your jump distance as well by 5 feet. For gloves, you're going to want the Bone Spike Gloves, which means your attacks ignore resistance to slashing, piercing, and bludgeoning damage, which means that your weapon attacks are never going to have their damage decreased due to resistance. For rings, you're going to want the Caustic Band to increase damage output and the Ring of Protection to once again increase your armor class. You're also going to want the Moondrop Pendant, which means when the wearer has 50% hit points or less, they don't provoke attack opportunities. For weapons, you're going to want Baldur'S Giant Slayer and the Vicious Shortbow. Now ideally when you're in combat, you're always going to want to utilize your rage whenever you get the opportunity to. Overall, you're looking to deal anywhere from 84 to 124 damage per turn, which makes this build a heavy hitting build. Now the next build we're going to take a look at is what I call the Spirit Guardians build. And as the name suggests, the Spirit Guardian spell is going to play a key part in what makes this build. So the first thing you're going to do is put all 12 of your levels into the Light Domain Cleric subclass. You're going to want your stats to look like this. For your first feat, you're going to want Savage Attacker. For your next 2 feats, you're going to want to pick Ability Improvement, and you're going to want to sink all 4 ability points into Dexterity, bringing you to a total of 20. Now in terms of gear, the first piece of gear you're going to want is the Circlet of Mental Anguish, which means when an enemy fails a Charisma, Intelligence, or Wisdom saving throw against one of your spells or cantrips, you regain 1 to 4 health points. You're going to want the Cloak of Protection to increase your armor class. For armor, you're going to want the Helldusk Armor, which is going to raise that armor class up to 21. You're also going to want to have the Evasive Shoes to increase your armor class once again. For gloves, you're going to want the Gloves of Power, which means on a hit with a weapon attack, you possibly inflict a 1 to 4 penalty to the target's attack rolls and saving throws. For rings, you're going to want the Ring of Mental Inhibition and the Strange Conduit Ring. For amulet, you're going to want the Amulet of the Devout, which means that you gain additional use of your channel divinity. For weapons, you're going to want to have Crimson Mischief, Viconia's Walking Fortress, and the Vicious Shortbow. Now the idea behind this build is to make your character very hard to hit, which if you look at our armor class here, it's a total of 26, which is one of the highest armor classes I've seen for a build I've done before. And thanks to our Circlet, whenever we use Spirit Guardian and it deals damage, we actually gain health from it every single time per enemy, which means if you have enough enemies surrounding you, it actually gives you quite a bit of health back. Now ideally when you're in combat, the first thing you're going to want to do is activate your Spirit Guardian spell and just attack enemies as you see fit with your main hand weapon. With this build, you're looking to deal anywhere from 31 to 90 damage per turn, which is a pretty damn good amount of damage to be dealing per turn. And thanks to your Spirit Guardian spell, you're looking to deal at most 48 damage to multiple enemies per turn. Thanks to the Spirit Guardian spell, this build is really good for fights that involve numerous enemies. And since you're going to be incredibly hard to hit thanks to your armor class, it also means as well that your Spirit Guardian spell won't be easily broken during combat. Now the next build we're going to take a look at is the Shar Build, which is a great build for anyone who wants their tab to have a dark theme to them or are looking for a great build to have for Shadowheart. Now, a very important thing to this build is that you're going to have Shadowheart recruited, and you're also going to have her go down her evil route, meaning she's going to have to kill the Night Song. And it's due to the gear this build has. So the first thing you're going to want to do is sink 10 levels into the Fiend Warlock subclass, and 2 levels into Fighter with defense being your fighting style. You're going to want your stats to look like this as well. Now for the Warlock class, you're going to want to make sure you have the Devil Sight passive, and make sure you pick the Pact of the Blade so you can bind your weapon to you. For your feats, you're going to want to have Savage Attacker and Ability Improvement, and sink all those ability points into your Charisma ability score. For gear, you're going to want to first have the Dark Justiciar helmet, which means that while obscured, the number you need to roll a critical hit is reduced by 1. For cloak, you're going to want the Cloak of Cunning Broom, which means when you disengage in combat, you create a foggy cloud. For boots, you're going to want the Dark Justiciar's boots. For armor, you're going to want the Dark Justiciar half plate. For gloves, you're going to want the Dark Justiciar gloves, which means your weapon attacks deal an additional 1 to 4 necrotic damage, and you also get the Beckoning Darkness spell. For rings, you're going to want the Shadow Cloaked ring and the Ring of Shadows. And as for the amulet, you're going to want Shar's Temptation, which it doesn't really play like a crucial part in the mechanics of this build, but it just fits the aesthetic that we're going with here, being all Dark Justiciar themed with gear. Now for the weapon, you're going to need Shar's Spear of Evening, which means you're going to have to go down the evil route with Shadowheart in order to gain this weapon. And for your bow, you're going to want Least Expected, which means while you're obscured, you have a 1 to 4 bonus to ranged weapon attacks. Now the first thing you're going to want to make sure you do is that you bind your weapon to you using your Bind Weapon Pact ability, which will increase its damage output. Now with this build, you're going to make sure while in combat you make use of Shar's Darkness, and you're going to want to activate it so that you are in the vicinity of it, so you are obscured. While you're obscured, it's going to boost your range damage, and it's also going to make it harder for enemies to hit you. And thanks to our Devil Sight, it means we can hide within this and make a lot of ranged attacks that deal pretty good damage. You're going to make sure you make use of the Beckoning Darkness spell as well. Now the idea is while you're in this Veil of Darkness, you make ranged attacks. If enemies do come within the Dark Cloud, you're going to want to hit them with Beckoning Darkness, which you can use every turn for a bonus action, and it's going to deal 2 to 16 necrotic damage to them. And then you're going to focus on making main hand attacks. Overall, you're looking to deal anywhere from 22 to 62 melee damage, or alternatively 22 to 78 range damage. Which, due to your character being practically safe in that Veil of Darkness, because enemies are A, either going to be blinded when standing in it, or B, can't make range attacks into it, that's pretty good damage to be making for a character that is going to be really near impossible for enemies to hit. So the next build we're going to take a look at is the MythicSeal Build, which is my personal favorite build to use for my Tav. So the first thing you're going to want to do is sink 12 levels into being an Oathbreaker Paladin, which the Oathbreaker subclass is the biggest hear me out subclass in the game. I know a lot of people don't like this subclass and think it's useless, but you're going to see why it's my personal favorite in just a moment. You're going to want to make sure your fighting style is a dueling fighting style, and you're going to want to make sure your stats look like this. For your feats, you're going to want Alert, Savage Attacker, and Tough. Now for the gear you're going to want to have, the first thing you're going to want is Birthright, which increases your Charisma by 2. The next piece of gear you're going to want is the Deathstalker Mantle, which the only way to get this item is to have the Dark Urge be your origin. The Deathstalker Mantle, once per turn when you kill an enemy, makes you turn invisible for 2 turns. A very powerful gear item in the game. For armor, you're going to want the Armor of Persistence, which not only decreases all damage by 2, but you gain resistance to all physical damage types. For boots, you're going to want the Boots of Persistence, which don't only give you freedom of movement, but also long strider. For gloves, you're going to want the Hell Dust Gloves, which means your weapon attacks deal an additional 1 to 6 fire damage, and your unarmed attacks deal an additional 1 to 6 necrotic damage and can possibly inflict bleeding. For rings, you're going to want the Strange Conduit Ring and the Caustic Band. And for your amulet, you're going to want the Parapt of Wound Closure, which means whenever you get downed, you automatically stabilize. And whenever you get healed, you restore the maximum number of possible hit points. For your weapon, you're going to want the Duelist Prerogative, and for your range, you're going to want the Darkfire Shortbow, which grants you a resistance to fire damage and cold damage. You're also going to want to make sure you have the Elemental Weapon spell prepared so you can boost your weapon's damage. You're also going to want to make use of Protection from Poison, which means every long rest you become immune to poison damage and from being poisoned. Because we're a paladin, we're going to have auras. Now the 3 auras we're going to have because we're an Oathbreaker paladin include the Aura of Hate, which means we gain additional 4 piercing damage to our weapon. Now the one thing that people really dislike about this subclass is that when it comes to this Aura of Hate, it doesn't just only boost your piercing damage to your weapon, but undead and fiends weapon damage by 4 piercing damage as well. But in my opinion, even though it boosts the damage by 4 to enemy undead and fiends who have weapons, it also boosts your damage by 4. And not to mention, if you have a good armor class, then that damage boost isn't really going to affect much, especially because 4 isn't exactly the biggest number. So it's not like you're going to get completely crumbled by enemies who are undead or fiends that have weapons. It also means as well that if you animate a dead skeleton, that they also would get a damage boost to their ranged attack, though they have to be standing they have to be standing practically beside you, which I think the skeleton animate dead's pretty useless. The other aura you're going to have is the Aura of Courage, which means you and any nearby allies can't be frightened. The last aura you're going to have is the Aura of Protection, which means you get a +4 bonus to saving throws. With this build, you're looking to deal 59 to 153 damage per turn, which makes this the hardest hitting build in the game, which is why this Oathbreaker subclass is my favorite subclass in the game. Because with this subclass along with this gear loadout, it means that your character does the max amount of damage you could possibly do with just weapon attacks. It's an honestly incredible build that I highly recommend people having being their party for any auto mode run they're doing. So the final build we're going to be taking a look at today is actually a build not by me, but by someone else, a fellow YouTuber by the name of Fracture. He has a full video where he breaks down this build he came up with, where basically you can beat the entire game by just simply walking. I'll leave a link down in the description to his video that I highly recommend you check out because it's a really cool video. But basically, in summary, the way the build works is that it relies on 2 gear items specifically, the Baldur'S armor and Sentient Amulet. Essentially what you do is you toggle the Baldur'S armor Aura of Murder on and off, and in between toggling it on and off, you interact with the Sentient Amulet. You're going to want to have the Boots of Stormy Clamor, because anytime you inflict a condition on a creature, you inflict 2 turns of reverberation. You're also going to want the Gloves of Belligerent Sky, which means whenever you deal thunder damage, you inflict another 2 turns of reverberation upon the target. The Ring of Absolute Force is something you're going to want as well, because if you have your Tav get branded, you deal an additional thunder damage. And you're also going to want the Callous Glow Ring, because it means you can deal an additional 2 points of damage against creatures that are illuminated. Now, another key aspect to what makes this build work is Failure Eluve, more specifically Failure Eluve's Shriek. That's going to do it for today's video. Let me know down in the comments which build was your favorite, and what's the build you guys typically use with your Tav. Don't forget to drop a like and hit subscribe to help support the channel. Till we meet again, stay freaky.